These are big voting blocks, teachers, firefighters, police. Those are all people who are impacted by WEP and GPO. That's one of the big things that we were talking about when this law first passed, is there's going to be these pockets of people that have never filed for benefits, that each month they wait and don't file, they're actually just missing out on checks.
Welcome into Impactful Conversations, stories and lessons for financial advisors. I'm your host, Dave Edgecombe. Joining me today, Joe Elsasser, founder of Covisum, also a financial advisor. Covisum is a Social Security, but really a resource for financial advisors to use to plug into their practice that can make them work more efficient and kind of see a flashlight, maybe.
Sure,
I'll take
good insight.
Okay, we'll run with it. We're going to be talking about, well, the reason why he's in our hot seat today is because he is a bona fide expert when it comes to Social Security. I was going to call you the Social Security shaman, but I looked into it. Someone's already taken it. An advisor in Nepal already beat you to it. So you can't have that. But you can really shine a light on the Social Security Fairness Act, and that's what we're going to devote this podcast to, and what it means, who it affects, and what it means for a financial advisor going forward, and how it should be shaping their conversations that they're having with prospects and also clients, and how they should be approaching it with their current books of business. But before we get into kind of the nitty-gritty of it and I get you fired up about how it happened, I want to give you the opportunity to kind of give the elevator pitch about what Covisum does and what it allows financial advisors to do.
Sure. We started off as Social Security timing. So a lot of advisors know that name. And basically, it all came out of my own practice, because if you're an advisor, the hardest part of being an advisor is momentum. It's inertia. It's so much easier for a client to keep doing whatever it is they're doing than to do something new. So we said, okay, where are the points in life where people have to make a decision? Can we add value to those decisions? So ultimately, Social Security rose to the top of that list, because if you rewind to 2009, 2010, when I started work on this, you still had the restricted application. You still had the file and suspend. And there was no software that coordinated all these things. So Social Security timing actually became the first patented Social Security optimization software out in the marketplace. And that is what gave us our start. Now there's probably more advisors that know Tax Clarity, because Tax Clarity was really the first tool to create a tax map, to identify those places where different income streams interact in strange ways and take you way out of what you would have expected with a bracket. And being able to visualize that for a client to help them understand why that tax planning is so important, and why might we say a $58,000 Roth conversion rather than a $75,000? How did we get there? That's what Tax Clarity was built to do. And then most recently, we worked with Wade Pfau to validate our overall lifetime income planning method. It actually became Chapter 10 of his retirement planning guidebook, because choosing which account you're going to use at which point in retirement ends up adding just about as much value as the Social Security decision in the first place. But frankly, it pairs really nicely with Social Security too.
And I know how big the Social Security decision is in your guys' practice and how you guys kind of start your process. It all starts with Social Security. So when I say that you're an expert in Social Security, I mean it. And you just kind of laid it out. A little background on me. I used to work in local television, so I've been in a lot of newsrooms. There's no better place to be for breaking news or when something happens than in a newsroom. It's got a real energy to it, real buzz. I view the office, your guys' office, when this gets through Congress and is going to get signed into law by President Biden at the very end of his presidency, I got to imagine, take me there. I want to know what the reaction was in your guys' office when this becomes law, because I think it caught a lot of people off guard, and I think a lot of people are still trying to make sense of it because it feels so, I don't know. I'll let you tell me.
Yeah. Disgust was probably what I was feeling.
Yeah.
And I think that was probably a common feeling among people who have really spent a lot of time understanding why the different rules in Social Security are what they are, right? A lot of them don't seem to make sense, but most of it had a rationale. And so this legislation is literally proposed every Congress. And it's like, it's pandering, right? Because most of the time, this time it wasn't. This time it became legislation. But most of the time, it's like these are big voting blocks. Teachers in some states, the teachers don't pay into Social Security; they pay into a public retirement system. Firefighters, police, the old civil service retirement system. Those are all people who are impacted by WEP and GPO, and so they tend to vote in blocks. And so that's why this would get proposed, but it's also why it didn't get out of committee, because frankly, it's really fiscally irresponsible. It's really fiscally irresponsible legislation. It speeds the depletion of the trust fund by about 6 months, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it's significant. We'll talk about this later, I'm sure, but it's also an unfunded kind of mandate, which means that we're looking at a year plus before these retroactive payments that go back to beginning of 2024 actually go out the door. It's a mess.
So to kind of back it up a little bit, GPO, WEP, government pension offset, from my research, that was the one that impacted spousal benefits for state and federal employees. About 800,000 people impacted by that.
Plus,
does that
sure.
sound right? Okay. And then WEP, windfall elimination provision, that was state and federal employees. That's your teachers, your firefighters, your police officers, all kind of fitting under that umbrella. And that was roughly 2 million, a little more than 2 million people impacted by it. And what it did and what it does is it expands their benefits. It repealed those provisions, which exempted them from some Social Security benefits, and now they're going to get a check retroactive to January 2024, and their monthly benefits are going to change in their Social Security going forward.
Right. I think it's important to know that those figures that you've heard, the somewhere around 3 million figure, that's people who are already on the Social Security benefit rolls. In terms of total impacted people, it's more like 6 million. Right. And those are the people who are still too young to claim Social Security benefits. But when they do claim, they would have the WEP or GPO applied. That number is north of 6 million.
So obviously people that are in the know about Social Security know this right off the bat, but people that are even kind of vaguely familiar with it is you hear this 2032, 2033, 2034, somewhere in that ballpark of insolvency, that the Social Security is going to run out of money, Chicken Little, Skyfall and all that jazz. But when something like this goes through and you hear, okay, more people are going to be getting larger benefits, but there's not necessarily more going into it. So how is this going to impact that insolvency and when that is going to be depleted?
Yeah, it advances the insolvency or the depletion of the trust fund might be the best way to put it. It advances that by about 6 months. But I think it's really important to understand where these came in, right? WEP was introduced in 1983, GPO originally in 1977, and both were in response to this idea that Social Security is social insurance. You pay in, and as a result of you paying in, you get a benefit, and your family has an insurance safety net, if you will, for those things that are completely out of your control, right? If you become disabled, if you live a very long time. If you die, it protects your family. And so this idea of we were on the cusp in 1983, within 6 months of not being able to pay full benefits. And in 1983, WEP was introduced, the windfall elimination provision, and it was a really well-considered process. Now, is it perfect? Absolutely not. I wouldn't advocate that it was or argue that it was perfect. But it did say that if you had spent more than 30 years paying into Social Security at a substantial level, not just a few hours a year, but paying at a substantial level for more than 30 years into the system, you'd get full benefits, right? It was really designed for those people who were not paying into Social Security in any substantial way because they were paying into a separate system that would pay them a separate benefit that covers the same things. And that's why these laws were designed in the first place, was to prevent kind of what you might consider a double dipping sort of situation.
So who's impacted? I mean, you laid out teachers, civil and federal workers, state employees, but where do you see the impact of this reaching to?
Sure. any of those people that worked in non-covered jobs where they weren't paying into Social Security, they will get a larger check than they would have gotten otherwise, assuming they qualify for Social Security benefits at all. So for WEP to impact you, you had to have qualified for Social Security benefits, meaning you paid in for at least 10 years. So you had to have qualified in the first place in order for the WEP to impact you. GPO, you did not have to pay in. And frankly, GPO situations are where these big retroactive checks can happen. The $50,000 plus retroactive check.
My goodness, what does that do to your retirement plan right there?
Actually, it's really interesting. I mean, it'll dramatically change life. And I'll give you the scenario. It's like if I was a teacher all my life in a state that I didn't pay Social Security tax, and now I'm retired. Let's say I'm 80, right?
Okay.
I'm 80 years old. I'm retired, and my spouse had passed away a few years ago. And my spouse worked in Social Security covered employment and maybe was a high wage earner. So because I get, let's call it a $6,000 monthly benefit, then I've got this GPO penalty of $4,000. GPO is just basically whatever your government pension is, 2/3 of that counts against what you can get as a spouse or a survivor for Social Security. That's how it works. It's a really simple formula, actually. Funny enough, it started as if you have any government pension, you don't get spousal or survivor benefits. And then they realized that's totally overboard because what about the person who gets this small government pension and now can't get any spousal or survivor benefits? So the version of GPO we have today is the much more responsible version than the original that passed, which completely eliminated them for everyone. So let's say that I've got this $6,000 teacher's pension and a $4,000 GPO penalty. Odds are I'm not getting a spousal benefit, and odds are I'm not getting a survivor benefit. So frankly, I might not have ever even filed for Social Security benefits. That's going to be one of the big challenges with the implementation of this new law. And now I'm eligible for the full survivor benefit. So if my spouse was getting $3,000 a month and then died, now I get $3,000 a month on top of the $6,000 a month pension that I'm getting going forward that would have been wiped out by the GPO.
And what's the impact there?
So that, I mean, in that case right there that I just explained, that'd be a $36,000 retroactive check, assuming that I had filed for benefits. If I hadn't filed for benefits, I need to file right now. Actually, that's one of the big things that we were talking about when this law first passed, is there's going to be these pockets of people that have never filed for benefits, that each month they wait and don't file, they're actually just missing out on checks. So that's going to be substantial.
So now we're kind of getting into, from the financial advisor perspective, how to play this, because it does feel like, hey, there's moves to be made, and failure to make these moves is doing your clients a disservice, because like you said, in that instance, if they hadn't claimed it, the longer they wait, the more damage it's doing, kind of thing. So from a financial advisor perspective, what's the first move?
Yeah, identify those in your client base that are impacted by WEP or GPO. That is the first move for sure. Reach out, be the first call, because someone that they've worked with at some point in the past is probably going to be talking to them about, hey, did you know? And it goes around like wildfire in those circles.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we did was, what's the big question people are going to ask? It's going to be, how much more will I get? They don't know. And the reason is somebody who's WEP impacted, for example, all they get is their notice every year, their COLA notice it's called, after the cost of living adjustment is applied, what's my new benefit amount? It doesn't tell them how much their WEP reduction was, just tells them what they're going to get next year. That doesn't tell us how much this WEP reduction that might have happened 10, 15, 20 years ago when they retired actually took out, which means they have no idea how much more they're going to get. So that's the first big question. How is this going to impact me? As a software company, the first thing we did was we said, well, how do we answer that?
Yeah.
Right? And how do we answer it with the data that is available? Because if someone, just picture your 80-year-old, right? Okay.
I'm picturing them. I got a picture.
So this is somebody who maybe has never logged into the Social Security website in their life. And if they did,
Buckle up.
They did it prior to 2021.
Okay.
Okay. And anybody who originally registered prior to 2021 has to now do a new login. It's a different login system. So they have to re-register. And I'll give you an example. My mother, 68 years old, she's a retired software tester. That was what she mostly recently retired from. It took her 3 separate tries to get through that process in over 45 minutes to be able to just register for her account. So there's going to be a lot of people who will not be able to get the data out of the Social Security website to be able to calculate these benefits in the way that we're used to calculating benefits, which is, taking their annual earnings and calculating a benefit. So what we did was we said, well, we've got to work backwards then. We've got to take what they've got and kind of back out to what it could be. And that's one of the more recent things that we did. It's a big question.
I'm glad you brought up the website and the tech sort of gap, the technology gap that a lot of the people that could potentially be experiencing these changes in their retirement and in their Social Security, and the inability for them to get the right information that they need. And as a financial advisor, to be kind of stuck in limbo of, well, if Betty can't tell me what I don't know how to help.
Yep.
So I thought, so a financial advisor should be reaching out to these people and saying, hey, I think you're going to have problems. Why don't you come into my office and we'll log you through it and we'll work you through it together. I thought, boy, I'm the smartest man in the world. I should be telling all of our advisors this sort of thing. And when I pitched it to you, you said, that's not necessarily how I would do it. So how would you do it? How would you approach that scenario?
Right. So when I think about that 80-year-old or even the 75-year-old, what have you, most of them that are already retired know how to live on what they have today, know how to live on what they're making today. So while this is meaningful to them, it is a windfall. It's not something they were counting on, which means that I'm not sure that it's worth the time that it will take for someone who's less savvy than a retired software tester. These might be hour and a half plus appointments. And if you feel like you can justify doing that to get within $1 of a benefit, then by all means do it. If I want to be within $5 or $10, then I can follow a much simpler process. And we basically built out an Excel calculator and we decided, hey, we're not going to make it part of the software because this is going to be a problem for a year or a year and a half. It's not a forever problem. Yeah. This question of how much will I get? Of course, that's something that is available to all your guys.
I think you just kind of answered my next question, but I'm going to ask it anyways because I do think there's some value to it. Of in the short term, in the interim, what's the bigger variable that a financial advisor needs to account for in that client that's retired? And is it the backdated check that they're going to get for the last year, or is it the impact that it's going to have on their monthly Social Security payout going forward?
Depends on the client situation. So the backdated check will be a real planning point for the teacher that I described earlier, mm-hmm. right? That is going to create a really interesting tax situation. And the reason is it's not just last year's back check. It's every month that we get into this year. You figure they'll get 2 years of this substantial additional Social Security income that receives its own tax treatment at once, all in a single tax year. And maybe if it takes more than a year to implement this, maybe they get 3 years of it in 1 year. That'll be really interesting. And there are lots of things that you can do in the rest of the financial plan to account for that. One of the easiest is something we advocate for all the time anyway, which is keeping IRA withdrawals to a minimum and supplementing with taxable account or brokerage withdrawals for as long as possible. And then at the end of the year, taking a look and saying, okay, how much can I get out of the IRA at a good tax rate without stepping into any of these pitfalls or interactions between the different income types? That's something that is going to be particularly important for that group of people that'll get the large retroactive checks. For the smaller retroactive checks, it's more like, okay, how do we plan? But how can you change your lifestyle? Because you're used to living without it. Now you've got more, and you can make some lifestyle changes. So what's that look like? At the same time, we might not want to count on this cash flow being there indefinitely. As I said, there was a real reason why these provisions were passed originally. And I don't think we can rule out the fact that some version of these will likely be reintroduced when it comes time to address the Social Security solvency issue when we get closer to that depletion date.
So you joked with me before we started when I asked you about your crystal ball, and you said, well, it was broken. It was broken about 3 months ago, and I didn't see this coming. But
Right.
I'm going to ask you to break out the crystal ball for two questions. So what are the pain points going to be in the next year as they implement this and try to get those checks out?
Oh, there's a bunch of them.
Give me two.
On the 24th of January of 2025, so this is a couple of weeks ago, Social Security came out with a big Q&A on their website about the implementation. And what they said was that a lot of these benefits are going to have to be calculated manually. Right. For 3 million people. That's issue number 1. Issue number 2 is just because of the fact that these passed, call volume is going to go up like crazy for everybody, which means that even if you weren't impacted by these rules and now you're trying to do something with Social Security, that's going to take longer too. So this is a glut that's going to happen over the course of the year. The implementation of the retroactive payments is going to be a big challenge. And frankly, just dealing with Social Security because of the influx of new callers is going to be a challenge too. Those are probably the 2 big ones.
Okay, so the second question for your crystal ball, is this going to be sort of the first domino? Like if you look at it like an optimist and say, well, this is the first domino because Social Security needs to be reformed in some form or fashion, we believe. And the first bit of action, the first step, this is the first blink, so to speak, of a stare down. Is this going to potentially spur some sort of action, some sort of legislative action within the next 3 to 5 years that gets us closer to a solution, you think?
I would love it. History says no, but history also said that HR 82 wouldn't pass. So
let's be optimists. Let's be optimists today.
Realistically, I don't think that we are going to get the kind of reform that it will take to put Social Security on solid footing indefinitely in the next 2 to 5 years. I think that happens as we get really close to the wire of insolvency because the pressure at that point will be too high not to do anything. And that is a problem because it's always cheaper to solve the problem sooner. Mm-hmm. But I don't see that happening.
Joe, thank you for being an optimist. Thank you for looking in your crystal ball and really shining a light on this for not just financial advisors that are we kind of are doing this for, but John Q. taxpayer and my dad, who's a retired teacher, I had to tell him, hey, you might be getting a fat check. And he said, what? I said, remember where my address, keep me in mind sort of thing. So thank you once again. And thank you for watching. I hope this was insightful for anyone watching. And if you're looking for more resources, more ways to grow your practice, we've got all kinds of avenues like that on our YouTube channel. We've got House Rules with Alex House. We've got Selling with Stories with Randy Cook. So 2 great ways to kind of add to your practice and to continue to grow. And of course, if you're not liking and subscribing, I don't know what you're doing. So please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.